Oh, you're really not? Okay. I thought you were just being a smart ass.
I can if you want. No. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of A Little Unbalanced. I'm Cassie, and this is
Vanessa.
And we are here to talk to you all about fear today. So fear, according to psychologists, is a protective and primal emotion that evokes a biochemical and emotional response. So fear alerts us to the presence of danger or the threat of harm, whether the danger is actually physical or it's psychological. And if you've tuned in with us before, you know Vanessa and I talk a lot about the psychological fear that builds up with both of us having anxiety. So can you just maybe share with our audience a fear that you had when you were younger and how that shifted as you've gotten older?
So I feel like this is probably a lot for almost everybody. When you're younger, it's more irrational fears. It is the aliens, monsters, the murder underneath your bed, all those fears, right? And then as you slowly get older and you start to live life and you start to experience more life, it turns into getting sick, losing somebody you love, something happening. So it turns into the more kind of the realistic, but it's also just a story that you've made up that could possibly happen. It's not foreseen, it's not inevitable, but it's possibility.
Yeah. And that fear or that story you're creating in your head, whether it's around social situations or like what's happening in your body or something going wrong with your family or your kids, it feels real. So your physiological response is stress placed on your body, which is actually causing distress. And we store all of that fear in our body. And so if we're not aware of this and we're not actively moving our body, exercising, doing yoga, doing somatic exercises to release that, it can actually stay with you for years and years. And that's why so often, as we get to certain ages, people will notice that they just can't go on. They're hitting a stage of burnout, right? And it's because we're not dealing with all of those underlying fears. We're not talking about them. We're not recognizing what is something that we can actually control and what is out of control. Unless we spend time and we actually focus on that and work through it, right? And so I think when I deal with fears as an adult now, and it's often like you said with your kids, right? Do fears, when it comes to them, can I control this?
Yeah.
Or is it something that's out of my control? And so if I can control it, what can I focus on to actually solve the problem? And if it's not something I can solve, then can I actually poke holes in the story that I'm telling myself and maybe make it my focus onto things that are in my control? Do you feel like that's something that you have to actively tell yourself as well?
Yeah, that it's not something I can control. Whatever happens, happens. And when it happens, that's when you deal with it. Like I was saying, it's like the Goosebumps book where it's like you can pick what chapter you want to go down. So I'll go down this road and no, I don't like that. Let me pick a different road. I'll go down this road. But it's not that it's happened. It's that I'm trying to prepare
if it does happen
for what happens. Okay, if I go down this route, what could happen? So right now I have a crazy amount of anxiety and fear around that lovely lump I got. So because they weren't able to ever really know if it was cancer, so I always have that fear, what if it is cancer? I'll have some other symptom, or I'll feel off one day, or have another pain, and I'm like, oh, what if this is contributed to that? Yeah. And then that fear is there. Or okay, I'll probably be losing my spleen sooner than later, so I anticipate that, and I start going down that road of the splenectomy and all that. So instead of and I think I shouldn't be hard on myself there, because I feel like a lot of people would be going down that route.
Yeah.
But then I beat myself up over it, and I'm like, hey, don't worry about it. It is what it is. Whatever happens, I'll deal with it. If I have to have surgery, put your faith in the surgeon and you deal with it at that time.
Yeah.
But it's still all those fears, but fears of Yeah, I don't know. It's I find that fear really is like a wall in the way of pursuing so much more.
Hmm. Like fear is, it has a very real place in our lives. Like it's there to protect us, right?
Mhm.
But when it comes to things like, wondering if it's cancerous, I feel like that's a very valid fear to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, like, you talked earlier about not manifesting, that whole idea of manifestation
That
where
scares me. Yeah.
what you focus on grows.
Am
And
I going to manifest that I'm going
yeah.
to have that?
And I don't think that's the case here. I think it's just you working through the emotions that are tied to that fear. And I think like through that process, you're learning how to deal with something that's scary, right? Because like we're at the age now where those things are very real, right? Like that's something, and the fear of losing somebody and like those type of fears that are out of our control, but could happen, right? These things could happen to us. And I think it's just that you have to realize that that's not something you can control. However, like you said, you can control where you're going with those thoughts. And so you can rein them back in and try to focus on something more positive. But I don't know. I'm not in your situation. I can imagine it's very challenging.
Yeah. It's weird because I will have my like roller coaster of emotions. So it's like trying not to fight it, but ride it and just ride it instead of like ride the wave type deal instead of fighting it. So trying to just be okay with what happens, and whatever happens, and we will deal with it at that time instead of stressing about it now.
Mm-hmm.
And just going with the flow. But I think that in itself, so you have that and then you like stack. So it's like you have that and then it's something else that might be minor, but because you're already in that mindset, might feel so much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So just anything as small as, getting sick, or just the littlest things. Like, what is a really irrational fear that you have that might like it, if you stay in it, it kind of escalates?
Something irrational. So I think for me, like it's based around something to do with my kids, like them going, usually when they have a sleepover.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one for me. So, and I'm very selective about where my kids do sleepovers and things like that. But that's out of my control. And that's when my brain gets triggered and I think about all the what ifs. Everything from like sexual abuse to dying a horrible death, right? Like very irrational, but also could potentially happen in another, it's not unheard of, but I know that the people that I'm sending them with, they're safe. I trust them, and things like that. But I always do worry more about my kids than I think I do about anything else.
Oh yeah.
That's a big one for me. And then when it comes to like social pressure and social constructs, I always have this thing where I feel like I'm never showing up the way I want to be, which is perfect. But you can't be perfect for everybody,
No.
right? And so I'm working through that. But that's always been a big one for me, that social pressure to just be something, to be on all the time, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that fear, I burnt out, and I burnt out really hard. And it wasn't just that, it was a lot of other things. But like, I think all of those things combined, and another fear for me is my hormonal issues and everything I've been going through. It's not as dire as what you're going through, but it's really taken over my life. And so my fear is that I'm not able to get that fully under control, and then I can never show up the way I used to be, I guess, where I was a little more carefree and things were easier. And right when you're dealing with those underlying hormones and you feel like you're not in control of your emotions, and some days you're so exhausted you can't get out of bed, like that's hard to be your best self. And I always feel like that idea of being perfect, that's my fear, is that I'm not showing up perfectly for my kids or for other people. And I think that's a big thing for me.
Like somebody from the outside looking in,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that you or
Yeah, but nobody else is putting that pressure on me. It's just me having those internal fears of not being enough or not doing enough, right?
Yeah.
And that's something I've had since I was a kid. So you talked about how like you show up in life as a child, and I always wanted to be perfect or not, like, you know what I mean? I'd stick up for what I believed, but I would always try to do my very best in every situation to not ruffle any feathers.
Okay.
Yeah. And when I was younger, I didn't have as much fear as I do now. Like I traveled, I went bungee jumping, I went skydiving, I did all of those things, but I would never, probably not until I'm older and my kids are all grown up and you know what I mean?
Do something
Do
like
those
that.
things, because now I think about all the what ifs. Well, if my chute didn't open and I died, or if we're on a hike and I break my leg, then who's, you know what I mean? Like,
Are your kids going to be able to pack you
yeah,
out?
and they're getting older now, but like those are the scenarios that as parents we go, you know, like days and months and years ahead in our mind based on the decisions where we are now. And I don't know if that's anxiety or it's parenting, but
I feel like every parent has those.
yeah,
I feel like you could be the most carefree person in the world, and as soon as you have kids, you have anxiety.
Yeah.
And fear.
Yeah.
Do you think fear is anxiety?
Yeah, I do. Fear is like your physiological response, right? It's there to keep you safe, but anxiety is taking that fear, creating a story based off of it.
Well, fear, I think, is a primitive thing.
Yeah.
Because we used to always, especially as women, not especially, but there's obviously other people out there that have had to have those same, but as women of back in the day being raped, we always had to make sure we always had our be on guard, make sure we were saying the proper things, make sure we were doing the proper things.
Showing up politely in society.
So that we didn't get beat or raped, pretty much. So it's like, it's trying to come out of what has worked subconsciously into your brain for generations.
Yeah.
So overcoming those generational traumas. And then now that we don't have those as much, I feel like we still continue to hold on to those fears as women. I feel like we're looking for somewhere else to place those fears.
Yeah.
So it's like we're looking and it doesn't feel right, especially for me, because I've always lived in a state of like protectiveness, always protecting myself, always making sure I was safe. Because I've always lived in that state when I am comfortable and there's nothing to be afraid of, I like look for other things to be afraid of.
That's a good point. Yeah. So it's almost like being comfortable is not familiar.
Yeah.
So you're creating
I have like a fear of being comfortable.
That's hard.
Which
it's true though.
It is true. And it's a weird feeling for me. I remember one time going in my therapy and I said, like, I just felt relaxed and I don't know what it is, why we came down this road with discussion, but I was like, I felt like at peace. I felt relaxed. And she's like, yeah, that's normally how people feel. Like, I'm like, oh, and she's like, yeah, normally people don't have all that going on. And I was like, oh, must be nice.
Must be nice. I'm thinking the same thing.
Like,
must be
I didn't
nice.
realize that was a normal thing. Like how I was feeling was so abnormal. But so it was those, like the fear of being comfortable, because I'm always anticipating that something is going to happen.
Because that's protection.
Yeah. So it's like I'm trying to make sure that I'm always going to be okay when there's nothing that I need to be okay from right now.
Yeah. It's like when the other shoe drops, because inevitably it's got to, because that's what has happened in the past, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can relate to that. And I think that comes out in my relationship, unfortunately, with my husband, where if we're like really, really having a good day, I might start nitpicking at something and then it'll cause a fight. And it's that same idea where it's like, you were feeling too comfortable or too safe, which sounds ridiculous. But when you're constantly, when you deal with anxiety and you constantly are living all of these fear-based stories, you're not used to that. And so your body's going to do whatever it can to feel quote unquote safe, which means like what you're used to.
When my son has gone to his dad's, I feel like I have more time to sit and think in, my brain. So I have more time to be like, oh, what is this feeling? Oh, why is my knee hurting? Why is my back hurting? Why do I have these little pains? Why do I feel this way?
Yeah.
And then it's like, it must be cancer. Like it must be, all this stuff. So,
and that's like,
and when he's around, it's distracting me. So
yeah. And it's like your fear is your own worst enemy. It's like, I relate to when as a woman, you go to bed and you go to lay down and then your brain just goes ding, 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 ding. You're thinking about like all the conversations you had that didn't go quite the way you wanted to, how you should have shown up, the things you need to do the next day, like all of those little things that you just desperately want to shut that off in your head, all that fear off. And that's all it is stories that are circulating because nobody else is out there picking you apart.
Well, maybe.
Not the way you pick yourself apart. They're not ruminating on that conversation that you had in all of the different ways. Like I think about when we have a conversation, I don't go home at night and I'm not like, fucking Vanessa. She said this in that conversation, you know what I mean? But we take our fear and we use it as like fuel to criticize ourselves. Ooh, thank you.
That's good.
So that we can, show up the way we think we should have to show up. Does that make sense? And when you were talking about like generational trauma, somebody had brought up like witchcraft and how when women used to speak up and share their stories,
they were witches.
They were burned alive.
Yeah, because they were witches.
Well, yes, they were considered witches. Or if they went out and they picked herbs and they were helping people to heal, that's witchcraft. Not normal. It's witchcraft. So, and I think we've come a long way as a society where now women have all of these platforms. You know what I mean? It's changed so much, but you always do carry that with you. And that feeling like you do still have to show up in a certain way in order to be perceived, I don't know, maybe as prim and proper. Yeah. And so that kind of hit home when you said that because other people's perceptions are something that we can't control. It's out of our control.
Yeah. It's their problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think like when it comes to fear, as I got older and I had kids and hormonal stuff started happening, but that's when my fears really took control and my anxiety jumped into place. Whereas I was younger, I was more carefree and I just kind of lived in the moment. And I wish I could go back and know just how beautiful that was. I still had anxiety and I still had fear, but it came out in different ways. Like it would be more social where I didn't want to go to a party, but I couldn't understand that it was my social anxiety that was causing me to not want to go. Does that make sense? Yeah. Just little things like that, but it wasn't these overarching questions or dealing with, physical things or it affecting my work. Do you know what I mean?
Well, do you feel like, and I do this because anxiety is me, like I identify as anxiety. I didn't mean for that to come out that way, but it did.
Just a walking, talking stick of anxiety.
But do you think anxiety is a thing that people say now all the time?
Yes.
Like I get like that where I'm like, hey, I need, and my husband said this to me where it's like, quit saying you have anxiety. Say you're excited. Say you're looking forward to. Say you're nervous. Like it's not always anxiety. So I'm like, okay. So I try to do that when we're going somewhere and I'm like, I'm anxious. And he's like, you're excited? And I'm like, no, but so I do try to change that mindset where I'm like, yeah, I am excited. Like, yeah, these are butterflies of excitement. Yeah, this is like
because you're
nausea of excitement. Like I'm
having nausea of excitement.
I feel like I'm gonna puke. I must be so excited.
They say it's a good way to trick your brain, and my counselor had said like, you are always going to have anxiety, and the tools that we're working on are never going to take that away from you, but you're going to learn to call it out, right? Yeah. Or what is irrational and what is maybe keeping you safe. What are the things you can control and what are the things you can't, and focus on the solutions to the things you can actually control.
Yeah. And I feel the more time you have to sit with yourself, you definitely come up with a lot more shit. A lot more stories, I guess.
Yeah, stories that don't serve you.
Yeah, right? You become a fictional author of your own brain.
Yeah. And I found like on those nights where like fear is really just or anxiety is really taking, or excitement,
We're
nausea
excited.
is taking over, I have to do something like external. So I have to put on like a meditation, or I have to put on something that's going to fill my mind with not positive necessarily, but different train of thought. Because if I'm not able to get out of that fear-based pattern or story, I need something to help me get out. And so that's what I do typically. Or
this might sound bad because every therapist says don't do this. Is to watch TV. But I have to turn the TV on to like, and then as soon as I watch it for a few seconds, I can be out like a light again. But I also have to breathe. I also have to like physically like feel the breath coming into my belly, those really deep breaths, and then like count them out and like really feel that for me to calm down. And I can literally feel myself like calming when I take those deep breaths. If I wasn't to take a deep breath and I was to be like, oh fuck, then I would just,
continue to escalate.
Yeah, I'd like be fueling that fire.
Yeah. And I think like fear has interfered. So I'm trying to think, interfered with my work life, my ability to just be imperfect.
Yeah.
Because I always want to be perfect. It's interfered with my relationships with my husband, because any type of little criticism to me feels like overwhelming because I'm trying so hard.
Yeah.
But so much what I'm doing is actually just dealing with all the what ifs, all these stories in my brain, that it takes so much energy that I'm not actually living in the present. If that makes sense. So I do think it's interfered with like my relationships at home and work, and just in general, just showing up with ease. And I really do kind of feel jealous of people who don't have anxiety. To the point where it's detrimental. And I do want to continue to like learn and grow and call out my own shit.
Like, you need to be aware of your thoughts. So you need to be aware that if your thought or your fear is irrational, is your fear something that is actually there to protect you? Is there a killer in the house? Are you needing to like grab a knife to protect yourself? Like, is it necessary? Is that fear real? If it's not, try to put yourself back in the moment, because it's so easy. It's easier said than done, but like trying to bring yourself back to reality.
Yeah.
Trying to bring yourself back to what you can control in this moment right now.
And let go of like that physiological response that your body is having, and just recognize that it's there to protect you. And so these stories we're creating aren't always there to protect us. Are they?
No, probably not.
They're creating more harm, rather than being something positive. And, just allowing, like we always say, giving yourself grace, because it's not always easy when fear shows up, and when it's on a constant rinse and repeat, sometimes it gets really challenging. And so that grace to allow yourself to just try to do better every day and show up. And we're just so grateful that you joined us today. We're sending you guys lots of